What's up everybody, welcome back. So in this video we're going to add the perception component and we're going to set up our first sense, and that's going to be the sight sense. So let's dive into it. First of all, we need a new AI controller, so let's create a new blueprint class and call this a search for the AI controller. And I'm going to call this zombie AI controller blueprint. And let's open this up. So first of all, in the event graph, I'm going to look for the event possessed. Event on possess, I'm sorry. And I'm going to cast this pawn. So this is the possessed pawn, and I'm going to cast it to our enemy character. So that's the zombie blueprint in my case. And I'm going to store this as a variable. So that's the possessed pawn of this controller. And I also want to store the enemy character in here, so I'm going to create a variable and call that enemy player pawn. And make sure that's the correct class, so in my case that's the first person character. If you're using the example project, for example, if you use your own project, make sure you fill in the correct class over here. So we're going to compile and save and go into our enemy character blueprint. So in my case, the zombie. So this is what we set up in the previous video, the project setup. And I'm going to disconnect the event begin play and the delay over here. And I'm going to look for the event possessed. So this gives us an AI controller, and I'm going to cast to our new AI controller. So cast to zombie AI controller. And store this as a variable as well. So that's our AI controller. Make sure we hook this back up to the get all actors of class. And now we're gonna store the enemy in the AI controller as well. So drag in your AI controller reference and simply say set enemy player pawn. And plug this in from over here. So now both the character and the controller know what our enemy is, and they know the controller and the pawn, so everything knows everybody. So let's get into the class defaults of your character and make sure that you use the correct controller. So AI controller class, and set it to your newly created controller. And I'm going to change this to place in world and spawned. Doesn't really matter, but whatever. So this is all set up right now. Let's get back into the AI controller and let's add our perception component. So add component and look for perception, the AI perception component. And we're going to set this up. So on the right side we have the perception, and we can add senses. Click the little plus sign over here to add the first sense, and we're going to set this up for the sight configuration. So once you selected that, you can expand this further and you can set up some default stuff. So we have the sight radius, that's how far our enemy can see, obviously. So this is a pretty small map. I'm going to bump it down to around 1000 units. The lose sight radius is when the zombie loses sight after he already saw us. So if we are inside the sight radius and walk backwards up till here, he's going to see us. So I'm going to say around 1500. And then we have peripheral vision half angle degrees, and that's basically your vision cone. So right now it's 180 degrees because this is a half angle. So we can leave it like this for now. We need to expand the detection by affiliation and make sure you select all of these. As far as I'm aware, this is not all exposed to blueprints, so you can't really do anything else with it. Just make sure you enable all three of them. Then we have an auto success range from last seen location. I'll get back to that in a little bit. We can change the debug color if you like, but I'm going to leave it. That's no problem. Then we have a maximum age setting. So if we leave this at 0, that means the information we perceived will never be forgotten. If we put a maximum time in this, then after this time the perceived information will be deleted. So you can make sure things don't pile up into huge arrays if you have enemies that stay alive for a long time, for example. And we can start enabled or enable it later in blueprints. So that's the options you have over here. Let's leave it like this and compile and save. And now we're going to set up the gameplay debugger, because that's a really useful tool in this case. So go to your project settings, and on the left side you have the Gameplay Debugger tab. Go there, and the activation key by default is set to the same key as your console, probably. So you want to change that because that's not going to work. So I put / over here. Use whatever key you like as long as you have a valid key bind over here. And now we are able to use Gameplay Debugger. So go in game, and first let's enable it. So you see all kinds of information pop up on the top left of the screen, and with the numpad numbers we can activate and disable categories. So we're going to enable number 4, that's the perception category, and we could disable 1 and 2, so there's a bit less of clutter on the screen. And now we can actually visualize the perception component in game. So this is the side radius over here. There we have the loose side radius, and you can also see the peripheral vision half angle cone over here. So that's the 180 degrees vision that he has. So if we walk into this vision, you can see a little circle pop up around us, and that means we are being perceived right now. And if we start walking backwards, he will follow us, and he will always know where we are until we hit the blue side radius, and then the circle will stay there. So this information will stay available. And you can see the strength is 1, so that means we were seen at this location, and the age I was talking about a little bit earlier. So this was 15 seconds ago that he saw us at this location. So if you walk into the side radius behind the vision cone, obviously he's not going to see us, so that's a vision cone over here. If we go back into the AI controller, we can adjust a few things. So let's reduce the vision cone to just show you how that looks. So I'm going to put it at 70 degrees, and let's show the auto success range from last seen location. So I'm going to put this at 1000 units, and let's go back into game. Enable the gameplay debugger. So first of all, the side cone, peripheral vision half angle. What kind of a name is that? But okay. So you can see it's no longer 180 degrees. It's an actual cone shape now. So we have 2 times 70. That's 140 degrees vision cone over here. So the auto success range from last seen location works like this. If I walk into the side right now, you can see I'm being spotted over here, but the circle no longer follows me. So as long as I'm within 1000 units of this last seen location, the zombie will always know where I am. And it doesn't even matter if I'm behind a wall or outside the vision cone or outside of his complete radius. It doesn't matter, he will always know where I am as long as I'm within those 1000 units I specified in the settings. If I start walking further backwards and I hit 1000, then he's going to check again. So that's how you can use the auto success range from last seen location. So that's probably useful while you're running around a corner, for example, and you don't want the zombie to lose sight immediately. So you could fine tune things like that. So I think we covered most of the settings for the site over here. Yeah, that should be pretty clear. So then we also have some stuff to work with in the blueprints. So I'm gonna get rid of this and select my AI perception component. On the right side over here you see 2 new events, the on perception updated and on target perception updated. So I'm going to add this second event over here, and this will return an actor and a stimulus struct. So this actor is the actor that's being perceived, so in this case that's the player character, it's not the zombie. And over here we have the stimulus struct, and that's the information that's being returned by all senses. So I'm going to break this down. So it doesn't matter if you use sight or hearing or damage or whatever, it will always return this struct with this information. And that's the age and the expiration age we talked about earlier. We have a strength setting which doesn't really apply to the sight sense because it's always 1 if we are seen, and that's about it. So this will come back later with other senses. We have a stimulus location, that's the perceived actor's location where the stimulus came from, so the player location in this case. We have a receiver location, that's the zombie location. And then we have a tag option. It's not being used by the sight sense, so we'll get back to it later with other senses. And then we have the successfully sensed boolean, and that simply tells us if we are successfully seen or if we lost sight. So if I walk into the radius, this is going to be true, and if I exit the lose sight radius, this is going to be false. So how are we going to use this? Well, first of all, we are going to check if the actor that we perceived over here is actually our enemy. So I'm going to add a branch over here and simply compare this to our enemy player pawn. And if that's true, then we want to retrieve the information. But first I want to make sure this is our sight sense. So I'm going to drag off this stimulus struct over here and do get sense class for stimulus. So right now we only have the sight sense set up, so it doesn't really make any sense to do this. But later on we're going to have hearing, prediction, damage, and you might want to filter out what sense this actually was to determine what you want to do. So if we drag off the class over here, we can simply compare it to sight sense. So if you look for sight, you get AI sense sight, plug that in, and that works fine. So add a boolean here, a branch, I'm sorry, and plug in the condition. So now we know that whatever we perceived over here is perceived about our enemy, and it's perceived with the AI sense sight. So now we are going to drag this in over here, and I'm going to add another branch because I want to know if I saw him or if I lost sight. So I'm going to plug in my successfully sensed boolean. If this is true, I saw the enemy and I'm going to start chasing him. If this is false, I lost sight and I'm going to stop chasing him. So first I'm going to drag in my possessed pawn and simply call start chasing player. So we set up this AI in the previous video. It's just a really basic AI with a simple move to command. There's nothing much to it. So it will simply enable the boolean that will start the movement from the enemy. So call start chasing player over here. And now if we check this out in game, as soon as I enter the sight radius, he's going to follow us, and I'm going to walk backwards till I exit the radius, and nothing happens because we didn't add any code there. So he simply is going to keep following us forever. So let's work on that. Let's drag off the possessed pawn again and call our stop chasing player when he lost sight. But now he's going to stop immediately when we exit the lose sight radius, so that may not be what you want, but we're gonna do this right now. So I'm losing sight. Hey, he didn't stop. Let me double check. So I enter the radius and I exit the radius. Oh, he does stop. Okay, so that works. And now we could, for example, make him walk to the last seen location. So if I go to my zombie blueprint over here, and I'm going to add a new custom event, and I'm going to call that investigate location. I'm going to give this one input, and that's the location, and that's a vector, not a rotator, a vector. And now I'm going to simply call an AI move to. Come on. Oh, really? So not this one. I just wanted to show you. So you need this one, the AI move to. And we have the pawn over here. That's our zombie character. So that's our reference to ourselves. And we can plug in the destination over here. Possibly bump up the acceptance radius a little bit. And now we can simply call this event after we stop chasing the player. So I'm going to drag in my possessed pawn and call investigate location. And we can plug in the location from the last stimulus location over here. So that's where we lost sight of the player. Plug it in over here. And now he's going to keep walking towards that position. So he's chasing us. We're going to leave the sight range over here, but he's going to keep walking towards that location, and there he's going to stop. So if we happen to be inside the radius when he's approaching that location, then he's going to pick up and follow us again. So right now he sees us again, and he's going to keep chasing us. So I know what made it a little bit derpy. We didn't set this back to -1, so the auto success range was still active. If we set this to -1, then he will actually respond a little bit quicker. So now he starts chasing us, and if we exit the radius, it's going to be at our exact location, and he's going to go there. And if he sees us, he's going to follow us again, and otherwise he's going to stop at that location. And that's it. So that's your side perception, and that's your on-target perception updated event. And also the stimulus struct, the information it returns. So now we can also use the on-perception updated event, and that works kind of the same, but this is called whenever the perception is updated. So this only contains the last perception update. And this is all of the information ever stored in the perception component. So for as long as the zombie has been alive, everything is stored in here, if you don't set a maximum age, that is. So we get an updated actors array. So if we filter out this array, for example, so we add a for each loop. And we could check again if this is our enemy or not. So I'm going to compare it to our enemy player pawn. And if this is true, then we can get the perceived actor status. So if we drag off the array element over here, and we're gonna get the actors, let me see, actors, yeah, get actors perception. So this one over here, and you can plug in an actor and the perception component, and it will return whatever has been perceived by this actor and has not been forgotten into this struct over here. So we can break this, and that gives us an array of stimulus struct, and that's this struct again. So we can simply use a for each loop, for example, and then search for a certain kind of struct. So get sense class, and check if this is our side. So do equal side sense, plug this in, add a branch over here, and then we know that this is our side sense struct, talking about the player character, so the enemy of the zombie, and we can retrieve information from here. So the event on perception updated contains all of the information that's not been forgotten by the maximum age yet, and this only contains the last update. So that's the difference between those events. And if you right click and go to the AI perception over here, then we also have get currently perceived actors and get known perceived actors. So that works kind of the same. The currently perceived actors are all of the actors that are currently perceived by the zombie and are not forgotten, and the known perceived actors are all of the actors that are perceived also previously in the game and might be out of range or lost sight or whatever, but they are still in the stimulus struct because the maximum age hasn't expired yet. So you can retrieve those with the known perceived actors. So that's the difference between those two, and those 4 functions and events, so 2 functions and 2 events, are probably the ones you're going to use most. So I think we covered the basics, to be honest. So the settings are really not that extensive, and everything that returns is always the same, and there's not a whole lot of information in here. So it shouldn't be too complicated. As long as you get used to using the struct and the on perception updated, then you should be good to go. So in the next video we're going to tackle another sense, and that's probably going to be hearing, and otherwise it's going to be damage or prediction. So thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked the video or you think you might have learned something, please consider leaving a like. I'll be back for more.